journey into writing. I've always wanted to write stories, poems, and biographies of my ancestors. My genealogy pursuits have encouraged me forward and onwards in writing ancestral stories and sharing those with others. My earlier writing projects were instructional manuals. I did these mostly for TAFE students in the days when I was teaching in TAFE, and they were published through TAFE publishing houses. And that was back in the 90s. The fantasy fiction genre was one that I was always attracted to as a reader. The Hobbit was a book that I read which changed my life, or changed my reading life, and I was hooked on the possibilities beyond the real world. And my love of puzzles took me down the journey of finding writers like Dan Brown and reading the Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons and other books of his, which I really loved to read because of that love of puzzles. I'm also happiest when I'm immersed in a story of intrigue, a mystery, something to be solved. And you'll find me reading books on genealogy mysteries these days, or watching something on the movies, which is equally as intriguing. My Celtic upbringing introduced me to Wiccans, dragons, and magic. And I'm now trying to weave all of those themes into my writing. I dabble a little bit in tarot and in runes, and I love all that Celtic ancient mysteries. I am not a believer in one God. I follow many, and I love the ancient mysteries, and I'm willing to pursue and explore those to see how they affect my life and my writing. With the writing of The Crown of Wisdom, the Ari Chronicles, Book 3, I'll explain that in a moment, I'm exploring in a playful way how the use of tarot can influence the action of my three protagonists, and they are my grandchildren. They are emerging as reluctant heroes in a brand new world. It's set in a time of pandemic and mayhem, which it was back in 2020. And in this world, I could explore the impossible becoming the possible, and of course, good overcoming evil. And I have this band of sisters taking on a grown-up adventure into saving the earth. Now, I had the plot of the story in my head for quite a long time, as I had written the first two books of the Ari Chronicles years ago to entertain my three grandchildren. And of course, they feature in each of the books. It wasn't until 2020 in November that I finally got serious. I had previously heard about NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month, from Yvonne. And I'm forever grateful to Yvonne for encouraging me to look into it. And it was in November 2020 where I did get serious about writing The Crown of Wisdom. And in this environment, the attempt is to write 50,000 words in 30 days. It's a tall order. And I use Dabble Writer as my writing tool. It's a bit like Scrivener. And every day I could watch as my writing word goals were achieved. Now, if I slacked off, it made it harder the next day to achieve that day's goals. So I had to avoid not writing or slacking off. And I also found that I was tempted to review, revise, and edit each time I came back to my computer, and that slowed me down. And I realized that won't do. It doesn't have to be perfect right now. I need to get it down. I need to get the scenes written. I can come back to it later for that review process. So these were lessons that I learned along the way. In the first two books, the scenes were simplistic. They were based on the favourite nursery rhymes and books and movies that my granddaughters preferred for their entertainment. And I came up with the idea that I wanted to include those into the third book in some way, to refer to them so that people would go back to where those first two books are written. And they're not published per se, they're in my blog. And that's where they were originally years ago when I wrote for my granddaughters. And so with the help of the editor at Shoreline, my publisher, she encouraged me to add those links in a companion guide at the end of the book so that it didn't interrupt the reader's enjoyment of the story. They could go there later. One of the favourite board games of my grandchildren was, and probably still is, the game of Cluedo. And Cluedo is a favourite of mine, and so I wanted to weave that into the story. So the house in the cloud that the three protagonists inherit from their grandmother is designed on the Cluedo board game. And so I wanted to include that into the writing to describe the rooms and the secret passages that led from one to another, which helped the mood of the story move along. And we got to know about the girls and what they were like as they reached the house in the cloud. They had a few other adventures before then, but I won't give the total plot away. So coming back to the Cluedo game, I needed to draft a floor plan of this house to include in the book. So I needed to learn a new program in order to draft that and send it off to the publishers, to their graphic artists, to do something clever with. I'm yet to see what they've done. So I'm on edge to see that. So back to the content. So in that November, I actually achieved that 50,000 word goal, and I was really chuffed with that. It wasn't a polished, finished work. It was pretty rough, but it was done. And whilst I was writing, I was supported by that same group of people who were trying to achieve the same thing, write a novel of 50,000 words. And so that encourages you along the way to know that you're not alone, and that helped you get a feeling that you're in a community. Each time I read over the previous day's chapters, I found that pieces of the story would begin to play out in my mind as if it was a movie. I think I fancied myself like J.K. Rowling and getting this book onto the screen. And so I had visions in my head of how the characters would react, how they would learn, and how they would perform these magical feats. They also learned how to listen to lessons from their grandmother whilst in the cloud in their inherited house, the one with the Cluedo board game layout. And in it, they learned how to navigate into the rooms and to find other secret portals. And I wanted to support them in their time leaps, and so they each have their own online avatar. So bringing in modern technology into a story of ancient wisdom appealed to me. That juxtaposition of those two things really helps the story move along. So there's dancing back into the past and into the future, and the girls do this with the same skills that they learned in books 1 and 2. But I was still unsure of myself. It wasn't until I joined a group of other authors who met regularly. under the guidance of Andrew Jobling, another Australian author, and he writes books on wellness and has written his own story of success in his life and changing his life around. And in this group, I found these were my people. I was able to relate to them. I could hear what they were experiencing and realizing that I wasn't alone in my feelings of, well, perhaps misguided, but certainly feelings of being an imposter. That whole imposter syndrome was buzzing around my head all that time. I was invited along to that group by Annie Pateman, who is a Toastmaster that some of you may know. And she invited me to come along, and certainly when her book was published, I was listening with great delight to her first author talk in there. So I realised along the way that this whole journey of writing needs a support group around you, whether that be in your family or in your social groups or online, as I found was convenient for me. So there I was, fresh from the euphoria of writing this massive tome and sort of willing to take the next step, get it to a publisher. So in steps Shoreline Publishing Group. They are an Australian publishing house, and they have a hybrid type of publication process, which is a cross between self-publishing and traditional publishing, but without the onerous and difficult financial outlay. And they give you a great deal of help along the way with everything. So I do encourage you to look into that form of publishing. It's called a hybrid publishing. And you'll find Shoreline Publishing on their website, shorelinepublishing.com.au. During that process, I was introduced to my editor, Stephanie. Now, Stephanie was the one that gave me the most encouragement and boost to my confidence in the writing and reviewing of my manuscript. After sending her what I felt was a reviewed and well-adjusted manuscript, I then had to go through the process of pulling pieces out, moving them around, and really tightening things up. And I understood then what that process was all about. And I learned so much from her, but I was encouraged by the way in which she did it and felt that I was learning and growing as a writer at the time. Meanwhile, in the background, I was sharing my progress with my granddaughters, and I encouraged them to have input and insight into the book as well. And they each have their own copy of the original manuscript, and I invited them to have the last say on whether their actual names appeared in the book or not. The other two books, the Ari Chronicles, that appear on my blog were them as well, but they had different names there, and you'll find out later if you read them. So The Crown of Wisdom is book 3. The first book is called The Key to Cooperation, and the second book is called The Ring of Destiny. And in each of the books, all three of them give guidance for young people to believe in themselves and lessons to shape their life, and to do that with cooperation, bravery, and wisdom. Now I want others to read this story, The Crown of Wisdom, and to enjoy this fantasy fictional world that I have built for them. Now I'm learning how to shape my life as a published author. I'm really proud of the fact that this book will be published on September 25 in 2022. I have been a Toastmaster for many years, and that has helped me to do live casts and to speak in public, and now to do author talks. becoming a writer and fulfilling my journey into writing has given me a new voice. I do hope that you will have a chance to get a copy of The Crown of Wisdom, and you can order that directly online from shorelinepublishing.com.au.